The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, funding crisis during the government shutdown represents a profound conflict between executive branch discretionary power, judicial intervention, and the humanitarian needs of vulnerable populations. The core issue emerged when the administration, facing a lapse in congressional appropriations, initially planned to halt November SNAP payments entirely. Following intervention by federal district courts, which mandated the use of contingency funds to pay at least partial benefits, the crisis escalated. The Trump administration ultimately turned to the Supreme Court, seeking an emergency order to block a lower court mandate that they must fully fund the program for the month. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson issued a temporary administrative stay, pausing the full payment requirement pending review by the appeals court. This action temporarily preserved the administration's position, asserting that courts overstep the separation of powers when dictating how federal funds should be allocated, particularly when it involves tapping funds designated for other vital programs like child nutrition programs, Section 32 funds. This legal skirmish highlighted the vulnerability of entitlement programs, which serve over 42 million low-income Americans, including children and the elderly, to political and budgetary impasses, forcing millions into agonized uncertainty over their next meal. Reasons for the conflict and immediate consequences. The primary reason for the administration's resistance to full funding was its argument concerning the limited nature of available emergency funds and the proper role of the executive branch. The USDA's contingency fund, estimated at about $4.65 billion, was only enough to cover roughly half of the required $8.5 billion to $9 billion monthly SNAP allotment. The administration contended that tapping the additional $4 billion from other funds was an act of raiding programs that Congress had already funded, and that the financial crisis was the fault of Congress for failing to appropriate funds. They argued that a district judge was making a mockery of the separation of powers by directing the specific transfer of funds. The immediate consequences were chaotic and severe. First and foremost was the irreparable harm to SNAP recipients. As Judge John J. McConnell Jr. noted, the evidence clearly showed that people would go hungry and food pantries would be severely overburdened. Families already living paycheck to paycheck were suddenly forced to choose between groceries, rent, and medicine. Second, the court wrangling created immense administrative chaos at the state level. Several states with Democratic leadership, including Wisconsin, Oregon, Hawaii, California, and New Jersey, acted with haste to process and issue full November payments immediately after the district court order, but before the Supreme Court's temporary stay. This created a two-tiered system where some beneficiaries received full benefits while those in other states remained in limbo, awaiting further federal guidance. Furthermore, the administration's decision to opt for partial payment was criticized for being administratively cumbersome, which would inevitably lead to weeks or months of processing delays, further extending the period of food insecurity. Prediction and solutions for future stability. The Supreme Court's temporary stay in favor of the administration's request suggests a likely judicial deference to the executive branch's discretion in managing limited funds during a lapse in appropriations. This outcome provides a critical prediction for future shutdowns. Essential non-appropriated programs will continue to be used as political bargaining chips, and the judiciary will be hesitant to mandate specific, full funding solutions that involve restructuring the federal budget. The burden of avoiding this perennial crisis is, therefore, placed firmly back onto the legislative and executive branches. The long-term implication is a persistent lack of structural resilience in the anti-hunger safety net. This uncertainty causes long-lasting economic damage by depressing consumer spending and psychological harm by subjecting millions of households to chronic, cyclical stress. To prevent this destructive cycle, Congress must implement clear, systemic solutions. The most effective step would be legislative authorization for automatic continuing appropriations for all critical mandatory spending programs, including SNAP and WIC Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children. This anti-shutdown mechanism would ensure that funding for these essential services continues automatically at the previous year's level, until a new budget or continuing resolutions passed. Alternatively, Congress could create a dedicated, multi-billion-dollar emergency fund explicitly restricted for use only during government shutdowns and specifically authorized to fully cover SNAP benefits. This would remove the executive branch's ability to claim the well has run dry and would shield the nation's most vulnerable from being leveraged in political disputes. The instability surrounding food access is too great a social and moral cost to be left unresolved.